How do you really look at this insights that are actually coming in, and from a competitive India point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Amit, and great to be here, and also the launch of the first innovation index for all the states. Let me start off by actually citing something which a lot of us may not be. In 2016, Professor Richard Baldwin published a volume called The Great Convergence, Informatics and the New Technology and so on, and where he made the big, strong argument that now with the informatics and now actually even more so with AI and so on, the whole notion of comparative advantage of countries must now be shelved aside, must be sort of put aside. In fact, it should be replaced with competitive advantage, because that's what it is. Because the technology, what the role of technology has been over the decades, etc., is to reduce comparative advantage to a pretty much irrelevant concept. Because whatever you are, whoever, South Korea's POSCO producing the steel at the world competitive, scales and so on, is all because of its competitiveness and its competitive advantage. And I'm saying this simply because if you actually accept this, that it is now the competitiveness of each economy which matters in the global economy today and in the global rankings today, then underlying that must be innovation. And therefore, because innovation is the key to take the technology out of the labs onto the commercial the sort of side, and it's used by the industry, etc. I think therefore to that extent, the more we can emphasize innovation, the more we can emphasize in innovativeness, the better off we will be in our country. And unfortunately, we have not paid enough attention to this so far. And especially if you look at the states, and I dare say, and I hope Gurcharan will agree with me, that even our private sector doesn't pay the attention that it deserves, innovation and R&D deserve. And the fact is that our country has R&D expenditure at about 0.72% of GDP, and out of which 80% comes out of the public sector, and agencies and public sector department. So the private industry has also not done this. Our state governments are surely not doing this, and I think it's time. And I think this is where our Prime Minister's exhortation, actually constantly, that we must now work more and more on innovation, is so important. And I think to that extent, the innovation index, I am hoping, will set a new trend, if you like, for the state governments to sort of give enough attention and focus on this, and to now revamp their science and technology establishments on the one hand, to make sure that the distance between the lab to the land is shortened as far as possible, and three, and I think for most important for me, is that the mistrust between the private and the public sector is taken away. So that's what has happened. The two have worked in silos to a large extent, and I think we can't achieve the sort of breakthroughs and the sort of innovative, progress that we want unless that happens. I think this is, so therefore, I feel it's very timely. Let me finish it now, but then we'll come back to some of the other points later.
Sure. This is very interesting, but I would like to ask you a follow-on question, Rajivji. In fact, you said that the corporate world has effectively not done enough, because predominantly the investments are really happening from the government side or the public sector side. So how do we really make that push? Because at all points in time, it's become a favorite thing that we can always blame the government, because I always feel that the corporate has also not done enough. So how do we really push the corporate to move into that direction?
A difficult question, and I don't want to overstate my case, as it were. But I think the principal factor must be to introduce a much higher degree of competitiveness in the system, because that's what pushes R&D, that's what pushes innovation. And I think, and also to give much lesser attention to what is sometimes, which is taken as innovation but is not as jugaad. And I think our private industry must also remember that jugaad is about learning to live with the contingencies that you are faced with rather than to overcome them. I think this, and competitiveness must be both domestic as well as global. So I think we have to have a more open economy. And I think and I've been a votary of that for a very long time. And this is also, it coincides with what Gurcharan was saying about the working of the market forces, etc., because that's what. But you then require a framework. You require a framework to have the markets run better. And I think that is where the government's role is important. So the last thing that I must say is that what I referred to earlier is that if this mistrust between the private and the public sector goes, And if there is a willingness to work together, because there are lots of areas where the public sector infrastructure can be used very productively by the private sector, and where the private sector ingenuity can be used by the public sector to take their case forward. I think that synergy that the two must have, I think will bring about a much greater response from the private sector, and which I think in some cases you see that already, and but I think it can be spread much more. And the last one is that I think we must find ways to encourage what I call the next 500, not the largest, but the next 500, not the micro, but some of those firms in the middle, to encourage them to take up the growth and break the glass ceilings that they often face, by domestic monopolies, etc. So I think that's the way to encourage the R&D and innovation in the private sector.
Very interestingly, Amitabh ji, I have to come to you now. Quite interestingly, you have been one of the biggest proponents of competitive federalism. In fact, in many ways, if I might say, you have been the instrument of bringing that whole debate into the center. How do you really see the innovation index and the whole idea of competitive federalism moving forward?
So Amit, two things. Actually, it started with the ease of doing business index, where we used to fare very badly. We were 142nd. We've now moved up by 65 positions on the World Bank ease of doing business. But India is a very large country, and therefore, we are bigger than 24 countries of Europe. And therefore, states have to become easy and simple. And unless the states don't become champions of easiness and simplicity, it will be very difficult for India to grow at high rates over a long period of time. So on defined outcomes of 100 outcomes, we started ranking states. The first year we did this, Gujarat came number 1. But the very next year, Andhra beat Gujarat. And the third year, a new state like Telangana beat both Andhra and Gujarat. So, but the good thing was that Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, which are the mineral-rich states of India and which are plagued with very complex rules and regulations, they came 4th and 5th. They carried out vast range of reforms, and they came 4th and 5th. And my view is that if the eastern part of India starts doing well, then India will do well on a sustained basis over a long period of time. So starting with ease of doing business, we've done ranking of states on education, on health, on water, and all on SDG goals. And all this has spurred huge competition among states, and states actually started responding to us, because many of them said that we've not done so well, we've done this, distance to frontier. So they've all started working at grassroots level to reform education, health, nutrition, all these areas, and water particularly. And my view is that this philosophy of ranking states, naming and shaming them, is actually about bringing good governance, making good governance as good politics. So that's what we are pushing for. And I'm quite sure that this innovation ranking will spur greater innovation in many states, and many states will start championing innovation. Because we in India have really, what we've done is we've got this Anglo-Saxon system of education where we study, we mug up books and we get into the next class, then we mug up books and get into the next class. And actually we from Niti Aayog have tried to disrupt this through the Atal Innovation Mission. And we've opened up close to about 3,500 tinkering labs now, where we provide Internet of Things, we provide robots, 3D printers, all at school level. And it's absolutely delightful to see that innovation has got into the minds of young children at a very young age, from class 6 onwards. And we just did a competition between a school run in an IIT, a school, a public school, and a school from slum area. And actually at the end of this was run by Intel, and at the end of it, the children from the slum school did better. They were more innovative than the children from the public school or from the IIT school. What it showed really was that students who are confronted with challenges and problems, they find solutions to those problems. You know, Silicon Valley may be the most innovative place in the world, but it has no challenges. There are no challenges. But India is full of challenges. We have all the challenges of providing seed and fertilizer to our farmers depending on soil and weather conditions on real-time basis, making our water more drinkable, converting waste into energy. All the challenges of the world are in India. And if Indians can find solutions to their problem, they are finding solutions not for the 1.3 billion people of India, but for the 7.5 billion people of the world who are moving from poverty to middle class. And that's where the real challenge is. India has got this opportunity of finding, through innovation, finding solutions to the problems of the world. And I think we must take the lead in that.
Oh, very, very powerful. So from the response itself, but then quite interestingly, Amitabh ji, as we really go on to this, pushing this agenda for naming, shaming, or even really saying that you have to work hard, how do you think states should really come up making those changes in the innovation landscape that they actually have? Because that becomes a very important peg as we move forward.
So good thing was that when we started, we do a program called the Aspirational District Program. It's about 112 of the most backward districts of India. The Prime Minister calls it the Aspirational District Program. We rank states on them on 49 indicators on a real-time data basis. And we put it out in public domain, and every month we award the best performing districts in this. These are the most backward districts, and we've seen some remarkable progress. But the good thing that has happened is that some of the states have taken it forward. The same methodology, the same dashboard they've used to rank blocks. Now blocks are being ranked, and that's what the states need to do. Challenge every district of India on education, on health, on nutrition, on all these parameters. And similarly, like we ranked the states of India, the districts must be challenged, innovation front by the states. And we must start ranking all the CSIR labs. Actually, we must put this in public domain. What have they done for private sector in India? How have they fueled change in India on defined parameters? We should make it all put it all out in public domain and shame those who have not delivered and award those who have delivered. That's the only way India will grow. Competitive strength will come out of putting all this in public domain.
Very interesting, Ashutosh. I have to move to you now. In fact, if you really look at this whole idea of innovation, and you being an academic yourself, and then of course secretary with the DST, so you've seen the whole world in terms of how it functions. Where do you think this index can actually give a huge impetus and move forward the needle?
So index is indeed a very good beginning, and it's worked out very well the way you explained it. It takes into account inputs. So if you look at what are the critical inputs going into it, is the proximity and connect with R&D and innovation ecosystem, which includes incubators, it includes infrastructure of all kinds, but very importantly, it includes the people that you can interact with and learn a lot about different aspects of innovation, startups, and putting out things in the market. Now, if you look at, for example, the successful states, they have had these ingredients, that they have a local ecosystem. At the same time, they have, the early capital. For example, there are people running around with some deep pockets, and they have interest in supporting these startups. It has a market, but it also has a very good educational ecosystem. It could be in the form of top universities, could be IITs and so on. A whole lot of our innovations are actually driven by the young people now. In fact, yesterday in a similar kind of gathering, I pointed out that for innovation, I don't really trust people over 40. And there were people who were very greatly offended by that. And they came back to me later and said, oh, of course, there are exceptions. And I say, hey, take it easy, don't troll me on that. There are exceptions, of course. But you see a whole lot of deep tech, for example, artificial intelligence, communication, advanced communication, 5G and so on. We need to bring in more young people in there. Now, so VC Niti Aayog already talked about the fact that one of the ways we do business is through Jugaad. So let's come to the cultural aspect. So when you look at this input, output, which is all very good, what actually makes all of this possible? Now we have a model for incubation. We have this model which is basically centered on these incubators, on these accelerators, and they provide networking, they provide some amount of infrastructure, and they attract people, they train them. But is that enough? So now, today we may have, and some people say we got 7,000 tech startups, others say it's 15,000. I've heard 40,000 also. Anyways, whatever it is, we need to put a zero in front very, very quickly, because for the size, of the country, people, just being happy with 20,000 startup is not going to take us very far. So point is, we need a new model of incubation. We need, while strengthening what we got, we need to think in a different way. We need to think about distributed incubation, for example. Now everybody needs a physical space to do incubation. But what they need is, they need informational resources, they need infrastructural resources, they need connectivity, they need people to talk to, whole lot of those things. So is it possible for us to have another model which is highly distributed, but it provides the services that are needed in order for people to have successful incubation? So that's one aspect. The other aspect that I started to talk about is the deep culture. So for example, how do we move away from jugaad as the central way of doing business? Now, jugaad, of course, has been, one can't really discard it completely, because, in every planning, something goes wrong and you need jugaad in order to fix things for today. But it's not a long-term solution. It's not a solution which is optimal. It's not a solution you can scale up and be successful. So I often tell young people, I see some here, younger people, sorry, we're all young, but younger people, look, there are 3 different ways of doing business, which are jugaad, there is dhanda. So dhanda is business as usual, and I meet somebody on the street, I say, how dhanda going? He says, well, I have I added 5% this year, and so that's dhanda. So it's stable, not high risk taking, and it's just business as usual. The third aspect that our education does not emphasize, third way of doing business, is panga. So panga is disruptive. It takes high risk. Jugaad, dhanda, panga are the 3 mantras that we want to remember. Now, because you see, education or anywhere, it just did not prepare us for panga. It says, look, go to, mug up everything, go to exam, crack it, then you go to IIT, then you get a job, but, don't take panga at all, right? So this is deeply cultural, and we need to address that for the future, not today, but 10 years from now, most of our transformative businesses actually would come from this broad basing the base of the pyramid. So it's not, right now we are only focusing on the height of the pyramid, which is one good thing, but we need to focus also on the base of the pyramid, which is cultural. Now, one of the programs we started a couple of years ago is reaching out to 500,000 schools in the country. There's a program called MANAK, which is an acronym. I don't remember the full form, but anyway, acronym is good. So if you Google MANAK, you would know what this is. Anyway, 500,000 schools. Each school produces top 2 innovative ideas from these kids from class 6 to 12. They upload it in any of the 22 languages of the country, which means you need then an army of people actually to go through these ideas, look at the innovative content, and then 100,000 top ideas, each given 10,000 rupees and mentorship to convert idea into a prototype. Then they start competing on district level, on a state level, the national level, more mentorship. And I'm very happy that they're also connecting with the Atal Tinkering Labs now. So more and more connects in all this ecosystem that we are generating across different ministries is certainly needed in order to take this movement forward in a strong way. So anyway, what was your question? Let's get back to that.
I was just saying, like, how do you really look at the whole innovation ecosystem? And
that's how I look at it. I'm saying, look, so we need to focus on increasing the height of innovation pyramid. So we say, look, how many unicorns, how many stuff like that. And there is a great similarity between what you do in academia and innovation in that sense. You see, there is a thing called H index that measures the height, which means, really the excellence in the system. There another index called I-10 index, which measures how much of it is beyond a certain threshold of quality. So we want to increase that, more people beyond the threshold of quality. At the same time, so the volume of innovation need to increase. And so I talked about few ways of doing that, where do you concentrate. And I think really the cultural aspect is most important in the long run, the medium run, in addition to all the interventions which are going on now.
So very interesting, Ashutosh ji. In fact, I'll quickly move on to Renu ji. Madam, you've actually been at a ministry which has been at the center of creating a lot of impact, or actually trying to create a lot of impact. How do you really look at the importance of this index? How do you look at the ecosystem? And what should we really do as the next step?
Thank you, Amit. And I think you've rightly put it, the importance of this index. Because today we are at a point, keeping in mind the entire ecosystem which has been put in place over the last couple of years, where we have been able to create a very vibrant base. And this vibrant base is because of all the various aspects which have been discussed in terms of the policy enablers, in terms of the ecosystem. And we are now at a point where we have to really look at scalability and sustainability of this ecosystem. For the scalability of this ecosystem, it's not possible to do that till you bring in all the stakeholders. And states are very, very important stakeholders. For us to move beyond where we are currently, I think the involvement of the states is crucial and critical. And that really is what all of us are now trying to see. With all the support that we are giving in terms of creating as I said, a strong base, whether it's at the student level, as has been mentioned, through the ATLs, through the various schemes of Manak, and we have, DBT has Sitare. I mean, each one has focused schemes that we are doing. We are being able to bring in a lot of connectivity amongst these schools. We are then moving on to the universities. We have a lot of startups and young entrepreneurs who are now getting excited. We have the incubator ecosystem. But the only challenge now is that while this is all being driven by the center, the states have to take ownership of these activities to move on. It's also more important that we move into the tier 2 and the tier 3 cities, because that's really where there would be deep penetration of this. And the state involvement is not just in terms of being a partner to it, but in terms of being a key owner into all these various components that we do, which gets driven with this index that you put out. And I think this index is what is going to sort of nudge them into getting deeper into it. Because we are also looking at this now, very rightly said, that while our first few years went to say that, okay, let India make its presence felt to the world. I think we are already there. People have started recognizing that India is today a key player in this whole innovation startup ecosystem. Our innovations, our technology startups, the various aspects of this cannot be limited just to India. Our innovations are on affordability, on accessibility, but very rightly said by Mr. Amitabh Kant that we are not looking at innovations only to address the challenges of the country, because what is addressed in India is actually innovations for the world. And at that point, it's important that the states become partners. We are doing it now in 2 or 3 ways. One is we have to move beyond the incubation ecosystem. And beyond the incubation ecosystem is connecting the knowledge translational clusters and bringing in technology clusters. The knowledge translational clusters, of course, you have all the key players into it. But for the technology clusters, which really is the next phase after the incubator, where you have the grow out space, that's the connecting link between the incubator and the industrial park. The states have to come forward to take that ownership. We've done it in a couple of states which have their own policies, which have really come forward. They've set up their parks, they've set up their biotech parks, and we can see the difference there. We can see that the industrial policies which they've brought in place, which have helped the innovation ecosystem, combined with the startup and the Make in India policies has given it a huge jump. And I think that needs to be adopted by many more states. Maybe what we need to do is to now showcase those states who've done so well as their examples, and I'm sure there would be many other states who will quickly follow that. We are working very closely with them in the biotech space, and I can see a wonderful response from all of them. Maybe if we do more of that through these sort of exercises which is being done here as driven by Niti Aayog and working in the different spaces, I'm confident that we will see this happening as the states take it forward.
Very interesting, madam. Rajivji, I have to come back to you. In fact, if you really look at this whole innovation ecosystem that we've been talking about, the state level competitiveness or state level ranking, how do you think this can actually be an important driver for attracting investments? Because at the end of the day, it's all about that. If we really look at the Indian ecosystem, it's a sum total of 29 different ecosystems in many ways. So how do you see it as an impetus for or pushing or seeking investments and really pushing the agenda forward for growth of the country?
Yeah, let me make 3 points here, Amit. One, of course, that by driving, by moving from competitive populism to competitive good governance, I think that's the key, and that's what we in NITI are constantly trying through these indices that we've got. That look, you've got to compete with good governance, and once you start doing that, that automatically then begins to attract investors. Because once the investor sees that there is now, the state, is now shifting from being, what Ashutosh Varshney called a predatory state, or somebody else calls a soft state, etc., to being a development state, then the investor gets interested in that particular state. And I think that's key, much more important than to have these so-called investor conventions, conference, etc. I think that's the first point that I want to make, that shift to competitive good governance through all these. The second point is that, look, the states can do a lot in terms of bringing about synergies between the different stakeholders and different agencies and entities which exist for innovation. Now, I'm told, for example, that in Bangalore, in Bangalore, there are, I think, 43 public sector funded, 43 public sector funded research and science and technology establishment which all work in silos. In Delhi, for example, there are 23 of them. The IITs and the AIMSs and the National Physical Labs and the biliary sciences, etc., etc. All of them work in silos. Now, if the state government takes it upon itself, makes it upon itself to appoint, let's say, a department which can, or a CEO which can, bring about a cluster work among these, which can bring about a synergy between each one of them, then they can start producing innovations which then will attract the investor to commercialize them. So, I mean, if states are seen by investors as, if you like, generators of innovation, and not just process but product innovations as well, then investors will get attracted to them, because that's what investment is looking for. So that's the second issue there. And the third thing that I just want to make is that, we have, for example, in this index, if you pointed out yourself, and Neeraj did, that you've got a set of enablers.
In fact, I must mention here that it's an honor for me to have really worked on this work of innovation with Niti Aayog and as Institute for Competitiveness. And of course, special thanks from Michael Porter as well for really enabling this whole activity. So. Neeraj, should I request you to join us, like the team had actually... It wouldn't have been possible without Neeraj and Dr. Sanskuruji, this work. So thanks a lot for your support through the last 1 year or 18 months, please. Thank you. Thank you. The special thanks to Amitabh ji. Like, if you could just give him a round of applause. So we'll continue the conversation. In fact, if anybody has a question from the audience or somebody else, like we'll just take the questions and then continue. Anybody who has a question here, please. Could you just raise your hand if somebody has a question? Yes, please. Could we get a mic?
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I'm a social innovator and I've worked on innovations all across my life for the last 20 years. My question to you is, while we are launching these reports which are fantastic, they are going to go a long way to promote innovation. But when it comes to public funded projects, innovation is definitely not preferred because of the inherent way our structure is there on the procurement side. 3-bid system, L1 system, and so on and so forth. They don't really encourage, they don't foster innovation. On the contrary, you are not, they are a hindrance to innovation because, and when you work with the bottom billion or the bottom of the pyramid, you have to essentially work with the government. And when it comes to government, it's public funded money, and then you cannot really do anything about them.
The point understood, and I can assure you, and I think some of it has already been done, that we are actively trying to change the procurement processes of the government. And this is because we have had to do it for our own sake because, as the Atal Innovation Mission is now funded about 30 odd incubation centers. And, we've got the largest number of startups, etc. And we noticed the fact that the government procurement process has, this thing about so many years of experience and so much scale and so on. And I'm sure, I don't remember whether it's already been done, but in some cases, this condition is already being changed. Now, so therefore, startups will not be discriminated against. In fact, they will have the same sort of level playing field as any other. About the L1, I'm not so sure yet about what's happening. And I think this is where we could, and I take your point that we should think innovatively on how to do what may be called viability gap funding, or how to do some sort of assistance, for the startups and for the innovators, so that they could compete, with the established players in the market. The last thing that I could say is that we could begin from within the government to think about, sort of putting out our RFPs in a manner that encourage new ideas or encourage new, sort of products, as it were. And I think that will be done. We are at it, and we surely will have it done. You will see changes coming along in this regard. I don't know if you wanted to add something. Anybody else wants to?
Ashutosh ji, would you like to say something on this?
No, I mean, it certainly has been an issue which is being addressed that people have been aware of for a couple of years now. Another way to look at it is that the government procurement, if it, user ministries that are going to procure something could define the parameters of the product or technology that they are seeking beforehand, and then say, look, this is the kind of price level, and then they put in some money in developing the ideas, the product or the technology, then they could be the first buyer. This would also not go against the WTO principles. So if you fund something for a special purpose, saying this is the need I got, these are the parameters that you need to deliver, and then if everything is found good, then you have some kind of preference for buying. There are many things that are, as was said, being looked into. Certainly we need solutions for this, which are workable, which would actually deliver.
So in fact, as the Vice Chairman said, it's already been done for the medtech sector and some of them, and you have these preferential market access policies which under the Make in India have been brought out. And there, these startups, their requirements have been done away with. And even in those cases, if it's a highly innovative product, it can actually be put onto the GEM portal. GEM has been working with the Kalam Institute there to bring that in. So steps have already been taken in that direction.
David, you had a question. I thought you raised your hand. Do you have a question or? Oh, yeah. Oh.
So, open innovation is the reason
half the Fortune 500 are still on the Fortune 500, and the other half are gone. So you're attempting to do open innovation across all the states, which is phenomenal. But the tendency is to approach it purely the way you would approach microfinance or entrepreneurship or any other approach where you say, we don't know the answers to these problems. We want to create lots of innovation. Let's get rolling. Let's make it happen. When the reality is, any reasonable amount of research would surface what we call scale leaders who are already solving problems significantly across a wide range of areas, who should immediately be targeted for concentrating resources. Starting from the bottom doesn't make any sense in the country the size of India, with so much innovation already being done, but not getting to scale because there aren't mechanisms to concentrate resources around the innovative solutions, and the system tends to go to the bottom and start over again. So how do we get around that? Debt for scaling enterprises at low cost. There could be a system that just says, if you can show me scale, I'll cut the interest rate in half. Doesn't exist. There's hundreds of enterprises that could go from modest size to big instead of starting from scratch.
So who would like to hazard a point on this?
No, I think, the point is well taken, but I mean, the fact remains that, I believe that if the scale would come out of the market itself, I mean, rather than the government getting into the act, and then, and in a country of our complexity and our diversity, etc., that if we start sort of selecting winners on the basis of some preliminary or pre-project kind of activity, I think it could be full of risks. So my thought is that if we facilitate the growth of innovation and we take it from TRL 5, 6 to TRL 8 and we help doing that, then the market will take over. That's the thought that I have in my mind. And the scaling up, I'm not sure whether we are in the business of doing that. The only thing that is coming about now, and which is happening because of the effort made by Atal Innovation Mission and Ramanan, etc., that we are encouraging 6 of our own ministries to start supporting innovation in the SBIR fashion. And once they start doing that and the innovation comes along, then those ministries could well be supporting them to get to achieve scale. The role that I see for the government is to match make, is to try and match make and find the person on one side which could provide the scale to those who are coming up with innovation. But I mean, for us to do so directly, I think is probably at the moment, at least, I feel, is perhaps beyond our capability.
Ashutosh, you wanted to add something.
So for a good startup, for it to be successful, it needs a back-end connection with R&D, which is getting stronger. The front-end connection with the market and the industry, which remains a little bit weaker. So when I've talked to a lot of people as to why scale-up is not happening at the scale that we need, there are 2 or 3 reasons which are very obvious. The first one is that this person, had a startup based on a brilliant idea. So it was driven by idea, but it was not driven by the marketplace. So really there was very little understanding of where this product is going to go, what is the size of the market, what's the business model, and so on, been a little bit poor. So we have put in actually a scheme in place which says before you do anything, the pre-incubation activity involves a certain number of things to be done, at least in our incubators that are supported by my department. It says there are pre-incubation activities, which includes pre-incubation grants of limited period and money, but more importantly, it's about knowing whether there is a future for it. Now, second aspect that comes in scale-up is, the startups are driven by maybe disruptive ideas, individual brilliance. But when it comes to scale-up, one has to give up panga and go to dhanda. Okay, what that means is now forget about your disruptive ideas. You need a stable way of managing your business and scaling it up. That transition I have found very hard in many number of people. Because now this guy is maybe a science major, and he has to bring in an MBA on the board, and their cultures are so different, and they're thinking about different things. The third aspect, very quickly, the front end, we need to connect startups with established industry. And I have been working with CII and FICCI, saying, look, bring your members on board, give early direction to these startups which are in line with your business. So let's say a company comes in and says, if you could make me this, then I would have interest either in buying your business or buying your product or helping with the scale up. So it's basically, unless that early direction and vision is injected in this startup, it's not very likely to succeed, no matter how brilliant the idea is. Especially, what I mean by success is the scale-up aspect. I mean, it would remain alive in some ways and kicking, but not very effective in that sense.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ashutosh. Madam, you had to say something.
Just a sentence there that I think you said that it may not make sense if we start from the scratch again, and we should identify those which are there to scale them up. I think from the government viewpoint, we have a large number of support systems that we put in place. We don't really always start from the scratch. What we do is build a lot of, in the pre-competitive space, you need to build a large group and a base. And what needs to be scaled up, that generally is put out in terms of what is available. We also have been looking at options in which technologies come in from outside, work with our groups here. But as rightly said by the Vice Chairman, is that we support up to a level where we can bring in credibility to that technology and it's demonstrated. Thereafter, the markets take it over. Then they have to take it forward. So the government comes till there till you bring in that. So we do both. We support in the pre-competitive space so that you have a group, and once it gets into that ready to be scaled up, then the industry can take it forward.
Thank you, madam. In fact, we just have time for one last question. Yatish, you wanted to ask a question, so if you could just, Yatish Rajawat here, please.
I had a very simple question. I realize the effort that the government is making to breed a culture of innovation, and I realize that the Atal Innovation is a step in that direction, at least get the students to start thinking innovatively. But that won't move the needle immediately. I mean, to move the mass needle, you need to nudge the business to be innovative. So what is it, and we have businessmen in this room, what is it that the government can do to nudge the business, and what is it that business can do to nudge itself to be more innovative?
See, I have seen decades of government trying to incentivize business to do R&D, higher deduction from income tax, 200%, 150%. And I've seen also fairly kind of misuse of that, but also the proof of the pudding being in the eating, which in this sense is not there, because after all of that, you still have the private business not really spending money on R&D at all in some sense, a very small amount. So my think about the government's role is to actually increase the ferocity of competition in this market, both domestic and open. I think, and I'm using the word quite advisedly, because unless that happens, unless businesses begin to realize that their existence depend upon continuously innovating both product and process, I'm not sure we'll get there. So that's my one point. What the businesses can themselves do, I think, is really just thinking in terms of global markets rather than domestic markets, and get over this myth of this large market in India. We are still a small market compared to any global levels, because $2,000 per capita doesn't make us a very large market. So if they plan for global market, they'll try and get the scale, which will then require them to compete in global markets and sunrise industries. I think that's again something that our Indian businesses, are not seeing as much as they should be. What is the sunrise industry coming along? Because if they do that, then the innovation, they would be bound to, innovate. Finally, I repeat myself, I think in this country, we have to stop thinking and working in silos. And we have to stop thinking and working with the mistrust of each other. We have to try and create these platforms where all stakeholders, private and public, everybody would come together and begin to feel and act for the national cause, which is to improve India's India's position in the global stakes as we go forward. Those are two or three of my suggestions, my thoughts about this whole thing.
Madam, you wanted to make a few comments.
I will take forward the last sentence which the Vice Chairman said, is for them to come together. I think what really needs to be done is that for the innovation level to move ahead, the industries have to, if you look at any of the global best examples, it's all about the clusters, it's all about creating the knowledge-driven enterprises. These knowledge-driven enterprises can only come when the large industries start working with this whole startup ecosystem that we are really developing. Today, our biggest problem is the startup ecosystem is not so connected to the large industry and the businesses. When we look at the startup ecosystem, we are talking about the government throwing up challenges and the government becoming the first buyer of the innovations which the startups do. I think the businesses and the industry also have to be partners in it. We need industry-driven challenges. I was just with the CII in one of their meetings in which we said exactly that. You give us the challenges, become a partner with the government. Let us together see in the early stages of the basic research, the initial fundamental research, we come forward. Thereafter, the industry has to come forward to take this whole ecosystem ahead. I don't think without that, you cannot just have government as the buyer of the innovation. The industry has to be a key player. And it's not just about the business. They have to be mentors to this large innovation ecosystem. What's going to happen after a few years? We'll build these thousands and thousands of innovators coming out. Who's really going to help them to move forward? We need the industry to do that, and I think that really is the partnership between the government and the industry and the businesses that will help us to move ahead.
So Ashutoshji, you had a point to do.
Yeah. No, so certainly I think we need to work with the industry to make sure, A, that they appreciate the role of knowledge more in remaining competitive, like the way it happens globally. So that kind of culture, insight, vision, and people ought to be there in the industry, which means that it's not only a push model, but there is a great pull for knowledge from the industry. Now, oftentimes it's suggested that, that this could be done if Saraswati was chasing Lakshmi. It rarely happens. It doesn't happen anywhere. What we really have to bring in is the fact that in some ways, Lakshmi has interest in Saraswati because of the new value it can produce for Lakshmi. So that is a cultural aspect. But now coming to the limited point, which is, you see, what can be done for the industry. Now we know that there is a new rule that the CSR money can be used both for R&D as well as incubators. So incubators, it was already allowed. We need to leverage that because earlier the idea was, look, CSR cannot be used for an activity which would benefit the industry. But that's no longer the case. So one can put in money for R&D even in the area that is of interest to the industry. So that would produce some amount of pull. Now I'll just conclude by saying that because VC had mentioned working in silos. Now this is also true that we divide basic R&D, then we divide technology, then we divide innovation and so on. But the model actually now ought to be that all of these compartments are integrated in the same mission. I'll give you an example. We started a new mission in what is called cyber physical systems, which includes Industry 4.0, includes artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever by name you call it. Basically, idea is this, that these hubs that would be established at a cost of about 4,000 crores, they would integrate the entire value chain or the knowledge ecosystem, starting from basic research to technology development, to producing human resources, to having innovation and incubator working together with it, as well as what you may call technology park, which is the end point of this knowledge ecosystem. So it's basically systems like this is what we need to produce, in which industry can actually participate as equal partners. So basically all these hubs would have a board which is not Sarkari, but basically 1/3 of members come from industry. Industry can bring their money and leverage the resources which are substantial, in fact, would be substantial. At the same time, they can get money, right? So because of the flexibility which is given to these hubs by the cabinet, it becomes possible for industry to be equal partner and be able to do things that they always wanted to do, but would not be possible in their own space. There are many other examples, but now I conclude there.
Thank you, Ashutosh ji. Sir, would you like to just say something very
Just
quickly?
one sentence I want to add is like that, you know, we need to, when we want to scale up innovations, only consortium model is the only solution. That's what I want to conclude.
Sir, Rajiv ji, I would like to just give you the final word, driving innovation in the country. One final word that you would like to say.
Oh, I've said too many already, I think. But, the final word must be competition. I think there's just one word, then it has to be competition. Because without that, innovation has no place. Competition is the necessary condition for innovation to prosper. And then come the sufficient conditions of government support, stakeholders, building trust, etc. So let me end there.
Thank you, ji. I think as all good things to come to an end, I think this panel does deserve a standing round of applause, please. Thank you. And I must thank all from NITI for really supporting this work, and we are very proud of the fact that we have really been able to bring it forward. Thank you. And we just have a small gift for you, sir, madam. So it's just a book, actually. So like as an academic institution, it is a book for you to read. It has become my favorite book in the last few weeks. It's William Dalrymple's book, Anarchy. So it's like, I just loved it as to what it is, and I thought this would just be worth a read. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Madam. Thank you. So kind of you, madam. Thank you. So kind of you. Thank you. Oh, yes. Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, Ji. Thank you. We are very proud of this work that we have done, wherein we have actually tried to look at things which are about child progress, wherein we have actually looked at 3 broad pillars to really look at some data points and come out with this index. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And I hope we will be able to do a deeper work as we go along.